Hello AWS friends, in this tutorial let's have a look on the AWS CDK and how to create resources by this as infrastructure as code and deploy them. You find all the required links and as a sample project in my GitHub account, and an important site to get the documentation here is the CDK workshops from AWS. As you can see, you can create CDK projects in different languages. I worked a lot, for example, in Java, but I think for CDK coding, Python is a good choice, and we're gonna create our first project here in Python. So let's have a closer look on the documentation. So I will first create a new folder for our new project. I'm going to call it CDK Workshop 1, and then we're going to switch into this folder, and by now we can start to create our project. As we want to use Python, we will use the command CDK init sample language Python. And now let's see what's going to happen and how's the folder going to look like once this command has been completed. It's going to take some seconds, and we can already open our folder. It's all done, and have a closer look what we get by here. So first we got this hidden folder for the virtual environment. We have to activate this in a second. We have a subfolder with the same name, CDK Workshop number 1, with the only stack. This has been created by the CDK init command and is some kind of a sample code already. So next we have the app file. This is a very important file where it all starts, where this stack is going to be created. We have a closer look on all this little later on, just an overview. We have CDK JSON file, which you will have to extend and adapt if you get a project a little bit more extended than this little hello world. But for our example, this is fine. We're gonna keep it as it is. We have a README. We have 2 requirements file, and we have to install these requirements. This is one command later on to use these libraries, and that's it basically. So by now we can continue with the next command. The next command is we're going to activate our virtual environment for Windows. This is a command for Linux or Mac. Please look on the AWS CDK workshop site. I have edited this README a little bit and cut it down a little bit shorter, and you find here all the commands we are executing here in an order, and some little bit more stuff. So by now we have activated the environment, and now we can do the pip install command and install the requirements we have defined here in this file. Okay, fine. By now, before we do a CDK synth or a synthesize command, you have to do the AWS Configure command to be sure you can do any changes here on your AWS environment, your AWS account. I have already executed it, so I'm fine here. So I can now continue with the CDK synth command. The CDK synthesize command is create the CloudFormation files as JSON, which will be deployed on our account. And these are based on the stacks we have defined in our project. So now it's a good point of time to take a closer look on this file, which has been generated by the CDK init command. We're going to extend this, of course, a little bit later on. So here we have basically 2 resources, SQSQ and a SNS topic, which are created. And if we execute now the CDK sync command, we can see we should get a new folder CDK out. By the way, the CDK sync command is not deploying any resources yet. It's also a good command to check if your syntax is okay, so if your files are do hold any errors or syntax errors, as a CDK Sync command will kind of throw an error here. So as we can see here, we have a CDK with its template file, and this is CloudFormation in JSON format, which will deploy these two resources. So before we actually gonna deploy anything here, let's verify in our account. We have a clean account, and so it's easier for us to check here what kind of resources are going to be created by the CDK. I'm here in the region Sao Paulo in my account, and as you can see, I have no CloudFormation stacks yet deployed. So before we can actually send our files to CloudFormation by CDK Deploy, we have to execute for the very first time this CDK bootstrap command, which will create also CloudFormation with some stuff which is required to execute the following CDK deploys. So as you can see, the command is going to be executed, and by now it's going to take some seconds. A CloudFormation file is created and should be deployed here in a second. Yes, you can see here the CDK toolkit. It holds later on, once it's created finally, some resources. So I have paused the video for a second. Took a while to create the CDK toolkit stack, and as we can see here, we got all these resources created, some roles and the ECR repo, a parameter in SSM store, and you can also take a look on the generated template file itself. And as you can see here, the command has been completely executed. Now we are actually ready to deploy our own stack. You can also, before deploying, check which kind of stacks are going to be created with the list command. In our case, it should be only one, because we have in our app file only this one auto-generated stack CDK WS1, right? And by now we are ready to deploy this one stack to our AWS account. This again should take a couple of seconds or maybe even a minute. So by now we have only one CloudFormation file on here, the CDK toolkit, and in a second we're gonna see. First we have to confirm, right? So it's going to tell you kind of what resources are going to be created. I will say yes, and by now the CloudFormation changed it. Actually here we don't have a change set because it's the first deploy. The CloudFormation file is created, and in a second, yes, here we are. Our CloudFormation file is going to be deployed here in our environment. So this is taking, of course, some seconds. I will pause the video until it's done. So our CDK WS1 stack was successfully deployed, and as we can see, we have a queue, we got a topic. We can actually check this if this resource, for example, really has been created. Let's have a look on SQS, and as you can see, CDK WS1 queue has been created. It's got a subscription on this topic, so this is fine. By now we can finally add a little bit our own resources to the project. Before we do this, we should get a little bit information on CDK itself and how to create constructs, and know a little bit the difference between what is a stack and what kind of constructs we have in the AWS constructs library. Please take a look on my blog on this one, CDK Stack Construct. You find the link in the README of this project, and it's important at the first when we start to understand, we have these level 1, level 2 and level 3 constructs. So we have level 1 construct, which normally starts, for example, with CFN and are very close to the CloudFormation template. So you will find there all the parameters you also have in the CloudFormation in these CFN classes of the CDK. The next level are the level 2, which are used very much normally when you code on CDK, and these are a little bit higher level and taste based. So you will find and use normally a lot of these ones. And the third one, the level 3, are on a higher level even and a kind of patterns. So we can see an example also later on following for ECS Service. So they help you to code even less than the level 2 classes. Let's first a level 1 construct to our stack, which we already got here, to get an example for this kind of construct. So this is, for example, the CFN repository, ECR repository, and we need, of course, to add here an import. So this is going to be working, and as you can see here, all these constructs start with CFN and normally have a bunch of parameters. I have removed here these configurations and the lifecycle policy. So with these mandatory commands it should work. I'm not going to deploy this now, but I'm going to at least call a CDK Sync. You always should do this when you edit your stacks or your constructs to be sure there is no error. So once the syntax is fine, the CDK Sync command should execute successfully. So let's check this after this little change, and then we gonna add what was fine, and now we're going to add a level 2 ECR repository. So I'm going to add a second ECR repo, this time the level 2 construct, and as you can see here, it's got no prefix and it's just a one-liner. So normally these level 2 classes are easier to use, and as you can see here, this should also work doing a CDK Sync, and actually should not throw an error here. And meanwhile I'm going to add one more example, or actually some more examples for level 2. Some IAM policies and roles. I got here a role policy, I got a policy document and a job role. Let's see, we already got the import, so that's fine. And by now we have added here level 1 ECR repo, another ECR repo with level 2, a role policy, a KSM document, and a IAM role. And by now we're actually ready to deploy this, so I'm going to do a CDK deploy. And we can check then in our AWS account that these resources really have been deployed. First there should be again a confirmation on which resources are going to be created, especially when IAM resources are going to be created. You have to confirm. I will confirm. So this is a job role. This is on IAM, and here the other stuff. Let's take a look on my account, and here this one should be now update in progress, and I'm going to pause the video until this is done. So the command is done, no error. Let's confirm on AWS. Right, our stack is update complete, and we have the job role which we have designed there. We got 2 ECR repos. As you can see here, there's a little bit difference in here between this, because the first was a level 1 and the other one is a level 2, but it's actually, if we take a look on ECR, it should be the kind of the same repo. So perfect, we have created more resources here in our file, but now it's time to get a little bit more structure here in our project. This is still the project structure from the CDK init project. It's fine for a Hello World project, but in the real world, when we are creating more and more resources to our account, we should not do this in one stack. and add more and more resources here in our single stack file. So as we do in CloudFormation, we should also not create one huge CloudFormation file. We should create kind of layers. So CloudFormation files for our roles, CloudFormation files for our networking resources like the VPCs, and so on for logical or functional layers. And so we will continue with adding some subfolders here. And one resource we're going to need, for example, often in follow-up resources is a VPC. We're going to need a VPC to create EC2 instances or other resources, databases, ECS services. So I will start to create here a folder VPC, and we will create a VPC in its own stack. So I added a subfolder here in my project, named it VPC, and I've added here again a stack file where I'm creating a VPC. So we could actually add here more resources concerning networking, but for this example it's fine. And also I have added outputs to the VPC stack, which other files and other stacks and other resources might need. And that's not enough for now. We also have to introduce the CDK stack template to our app file, to our app Python, and then we have to add it, of course. And by now we should have two files, two stacks. This is the one which has been created by the CDK init, and now we have added a second stack, the VPC stack. And if we do now a CDK Sync to check everything is fine and there's no error in the project, we can also see it should be by now two stacks. The CDK ls command should by now also return two stacks, not only the CDK ws1. Yes, successfully synthesized, and you can see we have a VPC stack and we have a CDK ws1. Let's extend our project a little bit more. I have added another subfolder called ECS, and here we're going to create a ECS cluster. This is a stack for it, and here's the cluster, and we're going to create a ECS service. And by here we're going to see a level 3 construct, so the so-called patterns. And this way we're using these ECS patterns import here, and we get, for example, here this network load balancer Fargate service. And this way it's much more easier to create Fargate service where we normally would have to define the service, the task definition, the load balancer and everything on our own. And by these templates, as you can see, we have a Fargate service, and we have a security group, and there's only two more outputs, but it's quite short and quite simple to create the service. So of course we have here one more cluster, we have a ECS service, and we have to add it again in our app file. So we used to add the VPC stack. Now we're going to use the cluster stack, and here we see another pattern we can use here with the CDK. Since the ECS cluster is going to need a VPC, we can pass the VPC, which we have created early from another stack here, as a parameter, right? So you can see on our app file we get the VPC stack, and we're passing here the VPC stack and VPC to the cluster stack. And the service stack is going to need a ECS cluster when creating the service. You can see here cluster, and here I am passing the cluster which I've created early here and the cluster stack to the service stack. And this way you can pass references to the resources which you have created in earlier stack to the follow-up stacks which you might use, for example the VPC or a S3 bucket or whatever. Now let's take a look if we can execute the CDK Sync command and if everything is working without an error, and then we will deploy this to our AWS account and see everything is fine and running. successfully synthesized, and by now you can also see on the CDK list command we have by now a ECS stack, a VPC stack, the one we have created from the init command, and the ECS service stack. So we got by now 4 templates which are going to be deployed, and we can by now with CDK we could deploy them one by one, or what we're going to do, gonna execute the command CDK Deploy -- all, and let's see this in a second. So nice, we are now ready to deploy our 4 stacks with the command CDK Deploy all, and this means we had by now on our account only the CDK WS1 stack, so by now we should get 3 more CloudFormation stacks and templates here, and this means we're gonna create a VPC. It's gonna take a while to create the VPC and the subnets and everything, a ECS cluster and a ECS service, which will also create some other resources like load balancer, target group, security group. Let's take a look on here. So there's already the ECS stack here on create. Next should be the VPC stack. Yeah, here's a VPC stack. And this one is gonna take a while, so I'm gonna pause the video and I'm going to come back once everything is deployed. So it's completed. Let's have a look on the CloudFormation console. Though we got by now the ECS stack, the VPC stack, the ECS service. We don't have a look on the VPC by now, that's getting too detailed, but let's have a look on the ECS service. So we got a cluster here, we got a task definition, and here on the cluster we have a running ECS service and task. And as we can see, this task here is also by now in state running, so this should be fine. And on the CloudFormation we should have for the service the outputs we added there, and these are the load balancer URLs, and actually we should be able then to open, right, that's our Fargate service which is running in our cluster, which is behind a load balancer. It's as you can see HTTP and not HTTPS, so there's still a little bit to do. And we can see here also in the EC2 command, so we should have a load balancer, right, and we should have a target group, and here on this target group we have here our service. It's actually still initial, so but it's gonna be healthy in a second. And yes, it has been deployed perfectly, everything cool. So perfect, we have created our first CDK project here, first with the init command, then later on we added here our resources here. We have added a CloudFormation repository, level 1 construct, a level 2 constructs here, policies and IAM stuff. Then we have extended here our structure to be a little bit more ordered in our project. We have added a VPC. Here's the code for the VPC, and we have added a ECS cluster and a ECS service, this kind by a network load balancer, and finally deployed everything, and we saw it's running perfectly. So at the very end we should do one thing to avoid the running costs. We got there a ECS service running, so we do a CDK destroy all. We're getting a confirmation in a second, and this will actually clean up everything here again in the account. The CDK toolkit stack is going to be remain, but it's not gonna cause a lot of cost, or almost zero cost. And but you can destroy this manually here by delete. So if you want to get rid of it, here we have to confirm. It's gonna destroy all the 4 stacks, and we can see here in a second it starts by the ECS service and gonna create one after one, delete one after one, and finally only the CDK toolkit is going to be remain. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you have fun with the CDK. As mentioned, you see you can find all the links in the README and the project, and you can see also the link to the GitHub project in the description for this video. Thanks for listening, and see you on the next video.